Hello, everyone. Today, my group and I will be covering the history of Chinese American hate crimes. My name is Joanna.
Hi, my name is Carmen.
I'm Jia Tianguo.
My name is Ding Rulin.
Hi, this is Bruce.
This is the outline of our presentation. First, we will be looking at the Chinese massacre in the South American War as our historical hate crime. We will be focusing on the background, causes, and impacts, as well as the changes. After that, we will look and discuss the current hate crimes due to the pandemic, also sharing about the same things. And lastly, we will be comparing the two as well and creating a program that can be implemented. In the end, you will be able to find the resources we used.
The war was a large-scale war in the 19th century which had an impact on the finalization of the international structure in the Western Hemisphere of South America. Formally declared war on Peru and Bolivia on April 5, 1879, this war was called the South American Pacific War by the outside world, and the cause of this war came from the struggle of the three countries for guano and saltpeter resources. It was also called the Guano War or Saltpeter War.
The background is the Chinese massacre in the South American War of the Pacific was a serious Chinese hate crime between the years 1879 to 1884, known as the Pacific Wartime period. During this time, Chinese were sold to Peru as cheap labor. Thousands of Chinese merchants and workers were massacred by Peruvian soldiers. Mobs of the black, especially black women, and paternal trolls. Main Chinese business stores were burned down and wasn't reported by any social media because Latin Americans rejected Asians on purpose between 1879 to 1884. About 100,000 Chinese people were sold through coolie trade, long-term contract workers to Lima in 1881 to substitute African slaves for work in guano mills and railway construction. In 1879, Chinese coolies were composed of 90% of sugar and cotton instead. During the wartime period, Peruvians, Chileans, Laos, Europeans, and Anglo Americans massacred the Chinese labor because of the child compulsion, and African slaves took over black females' jobs.
And here is the cause of the Chinese massacre in the South American War of the Pacific between 1879 to 1884. The cause of it is not just simple racial difference, but is the main cause is the cheap labor lead to the problem between the race. In the South American Pacific, the Chinese Kool-Aid War was mainly based on the knowledge of the owner. They imitated role-playing control Chinese labor system by adding role-playing actions and the role of the supervisor. Participating in the war changed their own density and also had an important impact on both sides of the war. At the same time, the byproduct of the historical event have attached a large number of gathering change and start a unique cultural path of the explosion in domestic political environment. In addition to the social contradiction caused by racial difference, one of the main reasons is the cheap labor problems that lead to the discrimination against the Chinese good people. Because of the cheap labor, they do the sugar and the cotton work, and which lead to the massive decline of the labor value of the local working problem and directly affect the interest of the local people, because the Chinese people were considered cheap labor. they took over the jobs and that the black people could have had.
Now that we have covered the causes, we will now cover the impacts. The events of that time have given us a great deal of reflection today. In particular, as an immigrant country, the United States now has a considerable number of Chinese people living in this society. In order for different races to live together in a more harmonious way, there are many communities where Chinese people gather and live in certain cities, and schools are in more integrated areas to treat Chinese students with a fair attitude. Even though ethnic Chinese students were inevitably subjected to prejudice and unfair treatment, consensus was reached to build a country and society together. There is more of a climate of cooperation and mutual help.
Here are some of the changes that occurred due to the Chinese massacre. Communities belonging to the same culture reduced the conflicts caused by different cultures. The gathering and establishment of communities by people of the same ethnic group unified the culture in this part of the region. It helped with having support and safety. In addition, it reduced the contradictions caused by different cultural shocks. Also, the basic guarantee of cheap labor was improved. Next, they promoted individual rights and equality for all. International agreements were made to promote and encourage respect for human rights, including international norms for the promotion of equal treatment of individuals in accordance with the law. And lastly, because of the massacre, rapid economic development and rising production capacity happened because there was more belonging in the communities.
Our second part is based on Article 2020 hate crime against Asian Americans.
And here is the background part because of the COVID-19, because the hate crime of the Asian. In 2020, there was about 2,800 hate incidents toward Asians, Americans, and Pacific Islander. On December 31, 2019, we had the first case of the COVID virus that was reported from Wuhan in China. On March 11, 2020, it was declared as the global pandemic, and the world shut down school, grocery stores, restaurants, shopping malls, flights, and etc. There were many rumors going around that COVID virus was brought and spread by the Asian, which create hate crime around the world. There has been more than 2,800 hate incidents in a time period of 9 months. Asians of all age groups were being human for no reason other than the fact there was the first case of the coronavirus was reported from China. They were being physically, mentally, and emotionally hurt and disrespected. In some cases, people were being burned, slapped, stomped, and being horribly abused as well.
Now that we have gone over the background of the 2020 hate crime against Asian Americans, we will now review the causes. The high impact of Asian hate crimes has caused many people fear of going out into the world and run their everyday errands. Many Asians were being attacked randomly at any time of the day and for no apparent reason. Many people blamed Asians for the virus since it was first discovered in Wuhan, China. This gave people an excuse to express verbal and physical anger towards Asians, whether Chinese or not.
And here's the impacts of the coronavirus that lead to the Asian hate crime. Awareness of the hate crime to a racial group, which is the Asian group. Biden cited the hate crime to prevent further violence. Some of Trump's posts have intensified ethnic tensions. and several acts of target violence have led to protests and unprecedented solidarity among large sections of the population. It is the unfortunate way of getting awareness is the fact that so much hate and hurt has to be done beforehand. The amount of hate crimes and people being hurt definitely cause attention and awareness. People were having protests against hate crimes and violence, and many people of different racial groups were sharing and standing up for Asian. As the hate crime against the Asian group continue to rise, Biden signed a bill to prevent further hate crime violence with the legislation addressing the crime during this time with an emphasis on Asians. This law allows hate crime related to COVID-19 to be expanded for review.
In this next section, we will be comparing the Chinese massacre in the South American War of the Pacific and the 2020 hate crimes against Asian Americans.
Unfortunately, throughout the years, there has been a violent history of anti-Asian violence in the U.S. since the 19th century. Racial discrimination began shortly after the 1875 Immigration Act, which prohibits the recruitment of laborers from China, Japan, and any other Oriental country. This cause made racial and sensed hate crimes. The Chinese massacre in the South American War of the Pacific, 1879 to 1884, led Chinese Americans to be known as cheap laborers, and the recent COVID hate crimes led Chinese Americans to be known as the main source of COVID. In both hate crime, people were being battered, bored, tortured, and discriminated. However, both hate crimes also allow people to become more aware of what is happening, and people spoke up for all Asian subgroups and became a strong community of people. People are now being held accountable for any rude and offensive thoughts and comments, and everyone is standing up for each other against those who are constantly hurting others.
Although harm was inflicted in both events, there is also differences between them. During the massacre, Asians were harmed because of differences within the ethnic communities. Many blamed the Asians for taking jobs, which caused conflict between the different minority groups. However, during the Asian hate crimes, people were harming Asian Americans because of an outside issue. President Trump at that time criticized the Chinese community for coronavirus, which basically gave a free pass for others to hurt and blame Asian Americans.
Because of both events, there has been a reflection on diversity in communities. The massacre led to civil rights movements and cooperation between different races. The attacks on Asian Americans the past year were not only inflicted by other Americans, but previous President Trump also gave COVID names like the Kung flu, insinuating that Asians were at fault. Since the attacks on Asian Americans during this pandemic, President Biden has signed a hate crime bill that will allow for faster processing of reports of racial crimes and hopefully lead to lower hate crimes altogether.
In this slide, we will be talking about the social stratification of a program design. According to the U.S. Commission in 1992, Asian American communities were categorized as prejudiced and outright violent. Low level of Asian culture appreciation led to low self-esteem and self-concepts. For example, first, the former President Trump used inappropriate words like the Kung flu. This led to unstoppable discrimination and violence against Asian American groups. Next, Lunar New Year is a rare practice. In the US, typical New Year is celebrated on January 1st. And third, Asian Americans typically learn a second language. In households, Asian Americans learn their native languages that is not English. And when children learn English as their secondary language, they are not fluent, which leads to more discrimination. Asians are also not as vocal as other races when facing discrimination. Asians do not actively speak out about what they experience and rather keep to themselves than cause more trouble.
Our workshop development will focus on the education of Asian culture. Anyone can participate to learn about different ethnic foods and participate in the New Year celebration. This will hopefully lead to better understanding of Asians and create more harmony between people.
And here is the program overview. Activity 1. The age group is from elementary school children 5 to 11 years old. Setting, there's like a teacher assistant, and a group of maybe like 5 to 10 of the children's objectives are the racial sensitivity. We are expecting the children will be able to experience Chinese culture through the public play, and children will be able to compare and contrast their own culture to the Chinese culture. And for the procedures, we will have a trained drama teacher, and at night the history teacher will help and develop a story in which children will create, help, and experience their drama role acting. The program evaluations the children apply to describe culture of the Chinese, compare and contrast the Chinese culture to their own culture. And the materials are like I staircase in the corner about loving and accepting the Asian shape. It will be discussed later in the next slide. And this is the program overview. We aim to reach out the children to in the elementary school from 5 to 11 years old, and to bring the awareness to the Chinese culture and remove any racial bias. The children will like participate in the plan and to compare and contrast their culture to the Chinese culture. It will help from a drama teacher and a history teacher to fully understand how racism is harmful and how to come to understanding about Chinese culture. And the teacher will read the book, and the name is Eyes That Kiss in a corner to the children, so they will be able to understand and learn about the Chinese culture, to learn about the difference between them and the Chinese culture.
Our program objective include introducing topics such as racism and oppression. We will start off our program by explaining and defining what these terms mean because it is important to have a clear understanding of them. After, we will include real-life examples of racism that has occurred amongst Chinese culture and how that made them feel. Experiencing racial discrimination negatively impacts one's mental health and emotional state. It can also put them in physical danger, as we have seen in the previous slides of hate crimes. We will also list effective ways in which we can support each other and create change. In addition, we will compare and contrast Chinese cultures to our own. Most times we don't realize the similarities and differences one has with our culture. Depending on an individual culture, they would be able to learn Chinese values, belief, religion, and food, then compare them to their own. Lastly, there is a significant value on education. Learning and adapting to different cultures at a younger age will create solid foundation and understandings. We will grow up with this knowledge and understanding to teach not only our peers, but our families as well.
Here is our workshop method. Accompanied by their teachers, the children will watch some videos or movies about Chinese culture. This will provide children with help in creating puppet skits and characters about racism. Children can also work in groups with the support of teachers and teaching assistants. Some children can choose characters and create characters for them, while others can create scripts and conceive stories they want to tell. Through personal manipulation and interpretation of stories related to the topic, when teachers and teaching assistants explain racial issues, children can more smoothly understand what kind of racial discrimination is, and it can naturally think about how to seek help in such situations.
The picture right here is the book named Ice That Kiss in the Corner. Is by Joanna Hall. And this book will be the one introduced to the children. Is a book that tells a story about learning how to love and appreciate Asian shaped eyes. It is based on a celebration of the diversity. I believe this is crucial for children to understand and learn at a young age because it creates culture, ethnic sensitivity. People who are aware of different cultures now early learn about the history, but they learn to honor and respect other values, beliefs, religions, language, food, and physicality. Also, divisions is caused by racism and discrimination. People are quickly to judge and comment on something simply because of the way they look, they live, and even their native language. We are being able to learn to surround yourself in different cultures and will allow respect, honor, and supporting to every individual. Thank you.
This is reference regarding the Chinese massacre and the South American War of the Pacific. These are references regarding COVID impact on Asian hate crime. Thank you for watching.